Military ID, now. Mercer slapped Denise Carter's card onto the table while Miller kept filming and Collins stood silent. Denise didn't raise her voice. You still have a chance to correct this. Then Mercer grabbed the dented brass whistle marked Raven 17 DC and turned it over. 2 faded letters stared back. RH. Nearby, a phone message was already racing to the commander, and Mercer had no idea what he was holding. The first thing Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer noticed was not the woman's face. It was the uniform. Fort Braddock's annual Family Appreciation Day had been running for less than an hour, and the main picnic field already looked like a postcard from a Carolina summer. Smoke drifted from long steel grills beneath the pines. Pickup trucks lined the gravel lot in crooked rows. Coolers were packed with ice and canned soda. Country music played from 2 speakers tied to a wooden post, competing with laughter, shouted greetings, and the steady hiss of burgers hitting hot metal. Most people had come dressed for the heat. Short sleeves, jeans, baseball caps, comfortable shoes. So when a black woman in a carefully pressed Army service uniform stepped out of the parking area carrying 2 foil-covered trays of macaroni and cheese, she stood out immediately. She was 54, though Mercer did not know that. He did not know her name either. He did not know anything about her. That did not stop him from deciding who she was. Mercer, 34, leaned against the fence near the grill with a paper cup in one hand. He was broad through the shoulders, loud when he laughed, and comfortable in the kind of way that came from knowing. Most people around him recognized his rank before they recognized his personality. Beside him stood Sergeant Jason Miller, 29, already half distracted by his phone. Specialist Eric Collins, 23, stood a little behind them with both hands in his pockets. Mercer narrowed his eyes. Tell me you're seeing this. Miller looked up. The woman was crossing the grass slowly because the trays were heavy. The late morning sun caught the brass on her uniform for a second, flashing against the dark green fabric. Miller gave a short laugh. No way. Collins followed their gaze. He did not laugh immediately. The woman's uniform was not new. The fabric showed its age if you looked closely. The seams had softened. One cuff had been professionally repaired. But everything about it had been maintained with almost obsessive care. The ribbons were straight. The shoes were polished. Every detail sat exactly where it belonged. Mercer did not see care. He saw something he could turn into a joke. Costume shop must be having a sale. Miller grinned and lifted his phone. Hold up. This might be good. What are you doing? Collins asked. Recording. For what? Miller shrugged. Whatever this becomes. The woman kept walking. A civilian volunteer near the drink table glanced at her and then away. 2 retired soldiers sitting beneath a canvas canopy stopped talking long enough to watch her pass. No one seemed to recognize her. That appeared to encourage Mercer. He pushed himself away from the fence. Come on. Collins frowned. Come on where? Mercer was already moving. Miller followed, phone raised chest high. Collins stayed behind for half a second. It would have been easy to remain there. Instead, he went after them. The woman was less than 20 feet from the food tables when Mercer stepped directly into her path. She stopped without stumbling. The trays remained perfectly level in her hands. For a moment, no one spoke. Up close, Mercer could see more. The uniform was old, yes, but it was not careless. Neither was the woman wearing it. Her hair was neatly styled. Her posture was upright without being rigid. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable. Mercer looked from her face to the insignia and back again. Ma'am, he said, with a politeness so exaggerated it became insulting. You lost? The woman's eyes moved to the name tape on his chest, then to the stripes. No, Staff Sergeant. Something in Mercer's smile changed. Miller's phone moved a little higher. How do you know his rank? Miller asked. The woman glanced at him next. Sergeant. Miller's grin weakened. Then she looked beyond both men to Collins. Specialist. Collins straightened without meaning to. Mercer recovered first. So you know how to read insignia? Congratulations. The woman said nothing. Mercer stepped slightly to one side, as though examining a display in a store. Where'd you get the uniform? The foil on one tray gave a soft crackle under the woman's fingers. She did not answer. Mercer nodded toward the decorations on her chest. You buy the whole setup together, or do they charge extra for the ribbons? Miller laughed. The sound was too loud. A few conversations nearby slowed. A woman in her 50s standing beside a folding table looked over. A retired sergeant holding a plate of barbecue paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Collins glanced around. People were noticing now. That should have made Mercer stop. Instead, it gave him an audience. You know there are rules about wearing military uniforms, right? Mercer said. You can't just put one on because you want people to think you're somebody. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Her face did not harden. That was what unsettled Collins. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look frightened. She looked patient, like she had been through this kind of thing before. Would you mind stepping aside? She asked. Mercer laughed through his nose. No, I don't think I will. Miller shifted closer with the phone. The camera was no longer subtle. The woman noticed it. Her eyes briefly rested on the lens, then returned to Mercer. You're filming? Public event, Miller said. Nothing to worry about if everything's legitimate. Collins felt something tighten in his stomach. The woman adjusted her grip on the trays. Are you finished? Mercer blinked. She lowered the trays onto the nearest picnic table with care. First one, then the second. She smoothed the loose edge of foil back across the top, as though protecting the food from the wind. Only after both trays were secure did she turn fully toward the three soldiers. She looked at Mercer, then Miller, then Collins. Not quickly, one at a time. It was not an angry look. That would have been easier. There was disappointment in it, and something deeper that none of them could identify. Are you finished? She asked again. The field seemed quieter. Mercer gave a dismissive chuckle. We're just trying to understand why someone would show up here dressed like that. Dressed like what? Like you belong. The words landed harder than he seemed to realize. Collins looked at him. Miller's smile flickered. Around them, people shifted uneasily but stayed where they were. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody told Mercer to stop. The woman breathed in slowly. For the first time, something almost invisible crossed her face. Pain, not surprise. Recognition. Then it disappeared. Her shoulders remained level. Her voice remained calm. I do belong here. Mercer stared at her. Then he laughed again. It sounded less certain this time. You expect us to take your word for that? No. The answer came immediately. Mercer's mouth closed. The woman continued, but I expect you to conduct yourself like a staff sergeant. That did it. For one brief second, Mercer's face went blank. It was not just that she knew his rank. It was the way she said it. No guessing, no hesitation, no nervous glance at his uniform. She spoke as though she had spent years correcting soldiers exactly like him. Miller lowered the phone an inch. Collins felt the first real wave of unease move through him. Mercer felt it too. That was why he became louder. You don't get to lecture me. I haven't lectured you. You don't know me. No, the woman said, but I know the standard you're supposed to represent. A few feet away, the retired sergeant slowly set down his plate. Mercer noticed. His jaw tightened. What's your name? The woman looked at him. Denise Carter. Nothing happened. No recognition crossed Mercer's face. Miller searched the name mentally and found nothing. Collins found nothing either. Mercer smiled again, relieved. Denise Carter. Okay. He pointed toward the food tables. So what are you catering? Denise's eyes dropped briefly to the macaroni and cheese, then back to him. I brought food. That wasn't my question. I know. The wind moved through the pines overhead. A paper napkin lifted from a nearby table and skittered across the grass. Somewhere behind the crowd, metal tongs struck the side of a grill. Clang! Nobody spoke. Mercer took one step closer. Denise did not retreat. He studied the insignia on her uniform again. Then something about his expression sharpened. He had found a new angle, a new reason not to let the moment end. Well, Denise Carter, he said, if you're really military, you won't mind proving it. Collins looked at him. Kyle. Mercer ignored him. Miller raised the camera again. Denise's face remained still. Only her eyes changed. Just slightly. And in that instant, Collins understood something that made the back of his neck go cold. She was not confused. She was not trapped. She was waiting. Mercer thought he had stopped a stranger in a borrowed uniform, but the stranger had identified all three of them by rank before any of them had introduced themselves. And now, for the first time, Collins wondered whether the person who knew the least about what was happening was not Denise Carter. It was them. 6 hours earlier, Denise Carter had been standing barefoot in a small kitchen in East Fayetteville, listening to the number 12 bus groan past her window. It was 5:43 in the morning. The sky beyond the blinds was still blue-gray, and the neighborhood had not fully awakened. A porch light burned across the street. Somewhere down the block, an old pickup coughed twice before its engine finally caught. The air conditioner in Denise's rented house rattled through another tired cycle. She stood beside the counter with one hand wrapped around a coffee mug. Her left knee ached. It always did before a change in the weather. Denise bent it carefully, waited for the stiffness to ease, then crossed the kitchen toward a wooden box resting on the highest shelf. The house was modest. 2 bedrooms, faded linoleum, a refrigerator covered with grocery lists and handwritten schedules from Open Table House. There were no framed medals on the walls, no photographs of military ceremonies, no plaques announcing what Denise Carter had once been. Most people who entered that kitchen would have assumed she had lived an ordinary life. Denise preferred it that way. She opened the wooden box. Inside, folded beneath tissue paper, was a brass whistle. Its surface had darkened with age. One edge was dented. A shallow scratch ran along the side. Stamped into the metal were 4 words and a number. Raven 17, DC. Denise ran her thumb across the engraving. Then she turned it over. 2 smaller letters were scratched into the back. RH. She stared at them for several seconds. Then the number 12 bus sighed at the corner outside, its brakes releasing with a familiar hiss, and the present returned. Denise closed her fingers around the whistle. By 6:15, she was dressed in jeans and an old gray sweatshirt, driving toward Open Table House. The community kitchen occupied a converted storefront between a laundromat and a discount grocery on a worn commercial strip east of downtown. Its sign had lost part of the paint around the word open, but every morning warm yellow light filled the windows before sunrise. Denise unlocked the side door. Her sister, Helen Carter, 67, was already inside. "You're late." Denise looked at the clock. "By 40 seconds. Still late." Helen smiled without looking up from the onions she was chopping. The kitchen smelled of coffee, butter, black pepper, and bread warming in the ovens. Stainless steel pans clinked beneath the fluorescent lights. A radio near the sink played old soul music quietly enough that nobody had to raise their voice. Denise washed her hands and tied on an apron. For the next 2 hours, she worked. She stirred grits, carried boxes, portioned scrambled eggs, wrapped sandwiches for adults finishing overnight shifts at warehouses and nursing facilities. Nobody paid Denise. She never asked them to. Open Table House had started as 3 folding tables in the back room of a neighborhood church. Now it served hot meals several mornings each week, relying on donations, volunteers, and stubborn people like Helen, who refused to let a lack of money become a reason someone should eat alone. At 7:05, Arthur Lewis came through the door. Arthur was 72, a retired mechanic who lived 3 blocks away and normally arrived with a joke ready. That morning, he did not. Denise noticed immediately. "You all right, Arthur?" He waved her off. "Just didn't sleep. You look pale." "I'm 72. Pale is one of my settings." Helen laughed from the stove. Denise did not. She watched Arthur take 3 steps toward a table. Then he stopped. His hand went to the back of a chair. "Arthur?" The room tilted for him. Denise reached him before he hit the floor. She caught his arm, guided him into the chair, and crouched beside him despite the sharp protest from her left knee. "Look at me. I'm fine. You're dizzy." "I said I'm Arthur." Something in her voice ended the argument. Not loud, not harsh, just certain. She brought him water and checked that he could answer her clearly. When the dizziness did not pass quickly, Denise took off her apron. Helen looked at her. "You have somewhere to be." "I have time." "You're supposed to be at Braddock this morning." "Then Braddock can wait 10 minutes, Arthur protested again. Denise ignored him. She helped him into her Ford sedan and drove him to a nearby clinic. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Morning sunlight came through the blinds in narrow strips. Denise stayed until a nurse told her Arthur was stable and would be evaluated. Arthur reached for his wallet. "What are you doing?" "Gas." "Put it away." "You drove me across town. You'd have done it for me." Arthur looked at her. "You know I would. That's why we're even." He studied her for another second, then noticed the garment bag hanging from the hook behind the passenger seat. His eyebrows rose. "That what I think it is?" Denise followed his gaze. "Yes." "You wearing it today?" "Yes," Arthur smiled. "Been a while. A long while." "You nervous?" Denise gave him a look. Arthur chuckled. "All right, stupid question." But it was not. Denise waited until he disappeared behind the clinic doors before returning to her car. For the moment, she remained behind the wheel. Both hands rested at 10 and 2. The street outside moved around her. A delivery truck rolled past. A city bus stopped beneath a shelter. A woman in blue scrubs hurried across the parking lot carrying coffee. Denise looked at the garment bag. There had been a time when that uniform opened doors. There had also been a time when people looked straight through it. After leaving active service, Denise had applied to a private security company outside Raleigh. The interview lasted 11 minutes. The man across the desk had looked at her resume, then at her, then back at the resume. He told her they needed someone who better matched the image their clients expected. Denise had known exactly what he meant. She had thanked him for his time anyway. 3 months later, medical bills and a stretch without steady work forced her to sell the first home she had ever owned. She never told Helen how much that hurt. The house had not been large, but it had been hers. Years of saving, gone. That was the part people rarely understood about dignity. Sometimes dignity was not standing on a stage while people applauded. Sometimes it was walking out of an office after being quietly told you did not look like someone worth hiring, getting into your car, and refusing to let another person's blindness decide who you became next. Denise started the Ford. At 8:32, she returned home. She showered, dressed, and opened the garment bag. The uniform came out slowly, carefully. She inspected every seam before putting it on. Helen arrived 15 minutes later, carrying the 2 foil-covered trays of macaroni and cheese for the Fort Braddock event. She stopped in the doorway when she saw her sister. For once, Helen had no joke. "Well," she finally said, "there you are." Denise adjusted one cuff. "I was here yesterday." "You know what I mean." Helen's gaze moved across the uniform. "You ever going to tell those people who you used to be?" Denise looked at herself in the small hallway mirror. Age had changed the face looking back. Time had softened some lines and deepened others, but the posture was the same. "If the uniform needs me to explain it," Denise said, "then I wore it wrong." Helen shook her head. "You always did have a complicated way of saying simple things." Denise almost smiled. She reached for her keys. The brass whistle lay beside them. For a moment she hesitated. Then she hooked it onto the keyring. Metal clicked softly against metal. Helen heard it. Her expression changed. "You still carry that?" "Sometimes." "Raven?" Denise nodded. Helen looked at the tiny letters on the back. RH. Denise closed her hand around the whistle. "Old story." "Good story?" Denise looked toward the morning light coming through the front window. "No," she said softly. "A necessary one." She picked up the 2 trays. Neither woman could have known that before noon, 3 soldiers would laugh at Denise Carter's uniform. They would question whether she belonged on their base. One of them would hold that old brass whistle in his hand and mock the letters carved into its back. And by then, it would be far too late to ask the question they should have asked first. Who was RH? And why had Denise Carter carried his initials for more than 20 years? By 9:20 that morning, the Carolina sun had burned through the last of the gray clouds. Denise's 12-year-old Ford rolled through the entrance to Fort Braddock with the air conditioner humming weakly and the 2 trays of macaroni and cheese secured on the back seat. Beyond the gate, longleaf pines framed wide roads and brick buildings washed pale by years of summer heat. The place had changed, but not enough to fool her memory. Denise drove past a motor pool, a row of administrative buildings, and a training field where several soldiers were setting up folding tables beneath white canopies. Every few hundred yards, something tugged at her past. A road where she once ran before sunrise, a building that used to house classrooms, a patch of pine woods where exhausted officers had learned that leadership looked very different at 3 in the morning than it did behind a desk. She kept driving. At the entrance to the family appreciation area, a volunteer in a yellow vest pointed toward 2 parking lanes. Guest parking to the left, VIP and command guests to the right. Denise glanced toward the right. Several polished SUVs and late-model sedans sat close to the pavilion. Then she turned left. The volunteer leaned toward her open window. "Ma'am, if you're on the command list, you can use the closer lot." "This is fine." "You sure? It's a walk." Denise smiled. "I've walked farther." She parked near the back between a dusty pickup and a compact car with a faded college sticker on the bumper. When she shut off the engine, the sudden silence inside the Ford felt almost intimate. Her hand remained on the key. The brass whistle hung below it. Raven 17, DC. She turned it once between her fingers. RH remained hidden against her palm. Then she released it. "Old story," she murmured. Outside, heat rose from the gravel. Denise opened the rear door and lifted the first tray. Her knee complained when she straightened, but she waited for the pain to settle before taking the second. No one came to help. She did not expect anyone to. The walk toward the pavilion took her past pickup trucks with tailgates down, coolers packed with ice, folding chairs and groups of adults greeting one another beneath the trees. Smoke drifted low from the barbecue pits, carrying the smell of charcoal, sweet sauce, and grilled onions. Country music played from somewhere ahead. A metal serving spoon struck a pan. Ice rattled into plastic cups. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, Denise became aware of something she had known most of her adult life. Eyes. Not everyone stared. Most did not. But a few people looked at the uniform, then at the old Ford behind her, then back at her face. Their expressions carried questions they did not ask. Denise kept walking. She had learned long ago that there were 2 ways people could fail to see you. Some looked through you. Others looked directly at you and saw only what they had already decided. She had survived both. The second kind still hurt more. A memory came without invitation. A glass office outside Raleigh, A polished conference table. A man in his 50s wearing a blue tie, Denise's resume resting beneath his hand. She had been out of active service long enough to need steady civilian work, and not long enough to understand how little some employers knew what to do with a black woman, whose resume contained more leadership experience than the people interviewing her. The private security company had advertised for an operations supervisor. Denise had been qualified. More than qualified. The interviewer had read through her record twice, then his eyes had settled on her. "Our clients expect a particular presentation," he had said. Denise remembered the silence after that sentence. "What presentation is that?" He had shifted in his chair. "I'm saying we may be looking for someone who better fits the image our clients are accustomed to." There were sentences designed to say something without admitting what they meant. Denise had heard many of them. She had closed her portfolio. "Thank you for your time." The man had looked relieved. She remembered that most of all. Not anger, relief, as though her dignity had saved him from having to explain his prejudice. 3 months later, medical expenses from her knee treatment collided with unemployment, and a mortgage that did not care how many years she had served. She sold the first house she had ever owned. The morning she handed over the keys, the rooms had been empty enough to echo. Helen had helped her carry the last cardboard box to the Ford. Denise had stood in the driveway staring at the little brick house. "You can be angry," Helen had told her. "I am." "You don't look angry." Denise had put the box in the trunk. "Looking broken won't buy it back." Now, years later, she crossed another parking lot carrying food for people who did not know any of that. That was all right. Kindness did not require witnesses. At the edge of the picnic area, an older volunteer struggled to lift a case of bottled water from the ground. Denise stopped. "Let me get one side. I've got it." "I know." Denise shifted one tray temporarily onto the corner of a table and helped lift the case. The volunteer exhaled. "Thank you. You're welcome. Want me to carry one of those pans for you?" Denise looked toward the main food tables. "I've got it." The volunteer laughed. "Fair enough." Denise picked up the tray again and continued. 30 yards away, Kyle Mercer noticed her. He was standing near a fence with Jason Miller and Eric Collins, talking about something that had happened during a training rotation. Mercer had a way of telling stories in which every decision became his decision, and every success somehow found its way back to him. Miller laughed at the right places. Collins mostly listened. Then Mercer stopped mid-sentence. His eyes followed Denise. Miller noticed. "What?" Mercer nodded toward her. "Look." Miller looked. Collins did too. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Denise moved between groups of people with the 2 foil-covered trays balanced against her palms. The sunlight caught the polished details of her uniform. Miller squinted. "Who is that?" Mercer's eyes went toward the parking lot. He had seen her get out of the old Ford. He saw the food. He saw the age of the uniform. He saw a black woman he did not recognize walking alone toward a military gathering. And from those unrelated facts, he built a complete story. "She's not command." Collins glanced at him. "How do you know?" "I know everybody important in this sector." Miller smiled. "Maybe she's retired." Mercer gave a short laugh. "With that setup?" Collins studied Denise more carefully. Something about her did not fit Mercer's conclusion. It was not the decorations. It was the way she moved. There was no hesitation in her route through the event. She did not look around for permission. She did not seem impressed by the uniforms around her. She looked like someone returning to a place she already understood. "She could be invited," Collins said. Mercer looked at him. "You see where she parked?" "So?" "Regular lot. 12-year-old Ford, carrying casseroles." Collins frowned. "What does the car have to do with anything?" Mercer did not answer directly. He did not have to. His assumptions were already doing the work for him. Denise reached another table. The keys at her waist shifted as she adjusted the trays. For half a second, a small brass object caught the sun. Mercer did not notice it. Not yet. Instead, his attention returned to the insignia. His expression changed. "That's what I thought." Miller was already reaching for his phone. "What?" Mercer pushed away from the fence. "She's wearing something she didn't earn." Collins looked from Mercer to Denise. "You don't know that." Mercer smiled. "Then we'll ask." Miller unlocked his camera. The tiny red recording indicator appeared on the screen. Across the picnic field, Denise was almost at the main food table. She heard laughter behind her. She did not know the three men were already walking toward her. She did not know Miller had begun recording. But when a shadow crossed the gravel in front of her and someone moved deliberately into her path, Denise stopped. The macaroni and cheese remained level in her hands. She raised her eyes. Staff sergeant, sergeant, specialist. 3 ranks, 3 faces. 3 men who had already decided who she was before asking her name. And Denise Carter understood immediately that the peaceful morning was over. Mercer stopped directly in front of her, close enough that Denise could smell smoke from the grill on his shirt and the sharp sweetness of barbecue sauce on his fingers. He did not salute. He did not introduce himself. He did not ask whether she needed help with the trays. He looked at the uniform, then at her. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to explain something." Denise held his gaze. "What would that be, Staff Sergeant?" The use of his rank landed harder than he expected. Behind him, Jason Miller lifted his phone another inch. The camera lens pointed straight at Denise's face. Eric Collins stayed half a step back. Mercer glanced briefly at Miller, then returned his attention to Denise. "You're walking around a military event, wearing decorations and insignia that suggest service you may not have." Denise's hands remained steady beneath the foil-covered pans. "May not have?" "You heard me." A few feet away, conversations softened. Not stopped. Not yet. But the noise around them thinned enough that words began carrying farther. Denise looked past Mercer. Families and soldiers filled the picnic area beneath the tall pines. Folding chairs, coolers, paper plates, a line near the grill, bright sunlight on parked trucks, normal things, ordinary things. And in the middle of them, a man had decided her presence required explanation. Denise looked back at him. "I'm here by invitation." Mercer smiled. "Whose?" "That isn't your concern." His smile disappeared. Miller whispered behind the phone, "Oh, this is getting good." Denise heard him. Her eyes moved to Miller. "Sergeant, if you're recording me, hold the phone steady." Miller blinked. A few people nearby turned. Collins looked down quickly, hiding the beginning of a nervous smile. Mercer did not find it funny. "You think this is a joke?" "No." "Then why are you acting like you're in charge?" Denise shifted the weight of one tray. "I haven't given you a single order." "You don't need to. It's the attitude." The word hung there. Attitude. Denise had heard that word in 100 forms. Too confident, too direct, too composed, too much. She had learned long ago that sometimes people used attitude when what they meant was, "Why aren't you making yourself smaller for me?" She said nothing. Mercer took her silence as permission to continue. "Where did you serve?" Denise looked at him. That question would sound very different if you were asking out of respect. Mercer gave a short laugh. "There it is." "What?" "The performance." Miller moved closer. The phone was now only a few feet from Denise's face. "Can you tilt a little toward me?" he said. "The sun's catching the insignia." Denise turned her head slowly. Miller stopped smiling. "Sergeant," she said, "back up." Something in her tone made him do exactly that, before he seemed to realize he had obeyed. Mercer noticed. His face tightened. He pointed toward Denise's uniform. "You expect people here to believe that?" Denise followed his finger. "What exactly are you questioning?" "All of it. Be specific." Mercer stepped closer. The rank, the decorations, the whole setup. Denise looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "If you don't know what you're looking at, Staff Sergeant, I suggest you stop pretending you do." A few people nearby reacted. Not loudly, a quiet intake of breath, a shift in posture. Mercer's ears reddened. Collins stared at the ground. Miller's camera kept rolling. Mercer pointed again, this time closer to Denise's chest, without touching her. "A woman like you doesn't walk into Fort Braddock wearing that and expect nobody to ask questions." The words changed the air. Not because anyone misunderstood them, because everyone understood them. A woman like you. Denise did not blink. A retired soldier standing at the end of a picnic table lowered his paper cup. A civilian volunteer froze with a serving spoon in her hand. 2 officers 20 feet away stopped talking. No one stepped forward. Denise felt the familiar ache move through her chest. Not fear, not surprise. Something older. The exhaustion of hearing a judgment delivered before a question had even been asked. For 1 second, another room came back to her. A hiring office outside Raleigh. A resume on a table. A man saying their clients expected a certain image. Different words. Same message. "You do not look like what we think belongs here." Denise let the memory pass through her. She did not give it the satisfaction of changing her face. Then she said, "Staff Sergeant, I'm going to give you some advice." Mercer folded his arms. "This should be good. Stop while you still have the choice." Miller let out a low whistle. Mercer smiled, but there was no humor in it now. "You threatening me?" "No." Sounded like one. It was professional courtesy. That made the retired soldier at the picnic table look up sharply. Professional courtesy. The phrase did not sound like something a confused civilian had picked up from television. Collins looked at Denise again. Really looked this time. The alignment of the uniform, the way her shoulders remained square, the way she never glanced down at Mercer's rank twice because she had identified it once and that was enough. Something did not fit. He leaned toward Mercer. "Sarge." Mercer ignored him. "Where'd you get the ribbons?" Denise's jaw tightened. Just slightly. It was the first visible sign that anything he said had reached beneath her control. Mercer saw it and mistook it for weakness. He pressed harder. "Surplus store? Online?" Miller chuckled. "Some of those sites sell the full package." Denise looked at Miller. The laughter died in his throat. She did not need to say anything. Mercer did. "You know what the problem is?" he said. "People wear things they didn't earn because they want respect without doing the work." Denise's eyes hardened. For a moment, the sounds of Fort Braddock seemed far away. The grill, the music, the ice shifting in coolers, the wind through Carolina pines. 30 years of work condensed behind her silence. Cold mornings, long nights, hospital corridors, training fields, the first house she had lost. The years when people had called her qualified on paper and unsuitable in person. The old pain in her knee reminding her every morning that service leaves marks no uniform can display. She looked at Mercer. "You should be very careful speaking about work you know nothing about." Mercer stared at her, then laughed louder than before. The volume was intentional now. He wanted the crowd. He wanted witnesses who would see him win. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about." Denise lowered the trays onto the nearest picnic table. Carefully, one at a time. The foil crinkled softly beneath her fingertips. She smoothed one loose corner before straightening. Then she removed her car keys from her hand and set them beside the trays. A small piece of brass struck the wooden tabletop. Clink. The sound was tiny, barely, but 6 yards away, Sergeant First Class Michelle Brooks turned her head. Denise did not notice. Mercer did. His eyes dropped to the keys. A dented brass whistle hung from the ring. The metal was dark with age, except along one edge where years of fingers had polished it smooth. Mercer reached for it, Denise moved first. Her palm came down lightly over the keys. Don't. One word. Mercer paused, then smiled. Why? Because it belongs to me. That uniform supposedly belongs to you, too. Collins finally spoke. Kyle, leave it. Mercer looked back at him. What? I said leave it. It's just her keys. The words were quiet, but they mattered. For the first time, someone standing with Mercer had questioned him. Mercer's expression sharpened. You getting nervous? No. Then let me handle this. Denise looked at Collins. Not gratefully, not approvingly, just noticing. He had spoken, once. Mercer turned back to the table, then, before Denise could close her fingers around the keyring, he picked it up. The whistle swung from his hand. For the first time that morning, Denise's composure visibly changed. Not much. A tightening around the eyes. A breath that stopped halfway in. Mercer noticed. He grinned. Well, look at this. He held the whistle toward Miller's camera. The engraving caught the sunlight. Raven 17, DC. Miller zoomed in. What is that? Mercer turned it between his fingers. No idea. He looked at Denise. Another souvenir? Denise held out her hand. Give it back. Her voice was still calm, but something beneath it had changed. The request carried history, weight, and 6 yards away, Michelle Brooks stared at the letters on the whistle and felt a memory stir. Raven 17. She had heard those words before, not from Denise, from Colonel Robert Hayes, and suddenly, the morning no longer looked like 3 soldiers confronting a stranger. It looked like 3 soldiers standing on the edge of a mistake they did not yet understand. Michelle Brooks knew the words before she remembered why. Raven 17. She stood near the drink station with a plastic cup of iced tea in one hand, staring across 6 yards of sunlit grass at the brass whistle dangling from Kyle Mercer's fingers. For several seconds, the rest of Fort Braddock seemed to fade behind those 2 words. Then the memory returned. Colonel Robert Hayes. A leadership briefing the previous winter. Hayes had been talking to senior NCOs about what happened when authority disappeared and all a leader had left was judgment. Someone had asked where he learned to stay calm under pressure. Hayes had smiled. Raven. That was all he said at first. Later, over coffee, Michelle had heard more. Raven Leadership Course, a field program from years earlier. Hayes had called it the place that taught him the difference between commanding people and leading them. Michelle had never heard him mention the instructor's full name, but she remembered one sentence. My Raven instructor taught me that panic travels faster than orders. So does calm. Now a black woman Michelle had never stood in an old army uniform while Mercer held a whistle marked Raven 17 DC. Michelle set down her drink. Across the grass, Denise held out her hand. Give it back. Mercer swung the whistle once from the keyring. So, relax. I'm looking at it. It isn't yours to inspect. Mercer raised his eyebrows. Neither is military property. Denise's expression tightened. This is personal property. Jason Miller shifted the phone closer. The camera captured the dent along the whistle's edge and the worn brass where Denise's fingers had polished it over the years. Mercer read the engraving aloud. Raven 17, DC. He looked at Denise. DC is supposed to be you? Denise did not answer. Mercer laughed. That's convenient. Collins looked at him. What does that even prove? Nothing, Mercer said. That's the point. Denise's hand remained extended. Staff Sergeant Mercer. He froze. Not because of the command in her voice, because she had used his name. You know my name now? Denise looked at the tape on his uniform. It's written on your chest. Miller snorted. Collins almost smiled again. Mercer's face darkened. The tiny humiliation made him more reckless. He held the whistle higher. So tell us what Raven 17 is. Denise lowered her hand. If you have to ask that way, the answer won't help you. Here we go again. Mercer turned toward Miller's camera. You hearing this? Every word. Mercer looked back at Denise. Lady walks onto a military installation wearing an old uniform, carrying decorations nobody here has verified. And now she's got mysterious little training souvenirs. Denise's eyes went cold. I walked through the same gate you did. With an invitation you won't show us. I said I was invited. I did not say you had the authority to demand my invitation. A murmur moved through the people nearby. The circle was widening. Some had come closer because they heard raised voices. Others had noticed Miller filming. Nobody seemed certain whether they were watching a security problem or the public humiliation of a woman who had done nothing except bring food. That uncertainty became an excuse to remain silent. Michelle felt ashamed of it. She was silent too. But now she had a reason. Before stepping into the confrontation, she wanted to know whether the impossible connection forming in her mind was real. She took out her phone, not to call anyone yet. She opened the camera, pressed record, held it low against her side. If this became what she feared it might become, memory would not be enough. Mercer turned the whistle over. The reverse side caught the light. Two letters appeared. RH. Michelle's breath stopped. Mercer noticed the initials at the same moment. Well, there's more. Denise's eyes fixed on the whistle. Mercer rubbed his thumb across the letters. RH. He grinned. Who's RH? Denise said nothing. Miller zoomed in. Maybe whoever actually owned it. Collins looked uncomfortable. Jason. What? Enough! Miller lowered the phone slightly. Mercer looked over his shoulder. You two suddenly grow consciences? Collins' face reddened. I'm saying it's a whistle. Give it back. Mercer laughed. You were laughing 5 minutes ago. That silenced Collins. The words struck because they were true. He had laughed. Not loudly, not for long, but he had done it. Now that small laugh seemed to tie him to everything Mercer did next. Denise watched him absorb that. Her expression did not soften. There was no easy forgiveness in her eyes, only recognition. A person could know something was wrong and still help it happen by choosing comfort over courage. Mercer turned back to Denise. Come on, who's RH? Her voice was quieter when she answered. Someone who understood what this meant. Mercer looked at the whistle. This? Yes. What, blowing a whistle? No. The answer came with such certainty that even Miller stopped smiling. Mercer waited. Denise did not explain. That frustrated him more than anything else. He wanted her to defend herself. He wanted nervous details he could challenge. He wanted a story he could tear apart. Instead, she stood before him with the patience of someone who did not require his belief. Mercer leaned closer. You know what I think? Denise looked at him. I'm beginning to understand. A few people almost laughed. Nobody did. Mercer heard it anyway. His voice hardened. I think you collected a bunch of old military junk, put together a story and figured nobody would question you because this is a family event. For the first time, pain clearly entered Denise's face. It lasted only a second. But Michelle saw it through her camera. The whistle was not junk. Whatever Raven 17 meant, whatever RH meant, Mercer had finally touched something deeper than the uniform. Denise extended her hand again. Return my property. Mercer stared at her. Then he deliberately closed his fist around the whistle. No. The crowd became completely quiet. Even the music from the speakers seemed too cheerful for the moment. Denise looked at his closed hand, then at his face. Be certain. Mercer frowned. About what? About the next thing you choose to do. A breeze moved through the pines. The foil over the macaroni trays fluttered at the corners. Michelle kept recording. Her pulse had quickened. Raven, RH, Robert Hayes. The pieces were not proof, not yet, but they were enough to make her look again at Denise Carter, at the perfect placement of the uniform, at the stillness, at the authority that did not seem borrowed from anything pinned to her chest. Michelle remembered another detail from Hayes's story. He had never named his instructor, but once, when describing the hardest training week of his career, he had said something unusual. She didn't humiliate you when you failed. She made you understand why you failed. That was worse, because then you had to become better. Michelle looked at Denise. Mercer was trying to humiliate her. Denise was still giving him chances to become better. A cold realization moved through Michelle despite the Carolina heat. She raised the camera slightly. Mercer saw her. "Brooks?" Michelle did not lower the phone. "What's going on?" he asked. "Just documenting." Miller gave a nervous laugh. "We've already got that covered." Michelle looked directly at him. "I want another angle." That wiped the smile from his face. Mercer's confidence flickered. Only for an instant. Then he held the whistle toward Denise. "Last chance. Tell me where this came from." Denise looked at the initials RH. 20 years of memory passed silently behind her eyes. When she answered, her voice was almost gentle. "No, Staff Sergeant. I think it's your turn to learn." Michelle felt the hairs rise on her arms. She looked down at her phone. For the first time, she searched one thing. Raven Leadership Course, Robert Hayes. No useful result appeared. Of course it didn't. Some histories lived in personnel files, some lived in photographs, and some lived only between the people who had been there. Michelle looked back at the brass whistle. If RH meant what she now suspected it meant, there was only one person on Fort Braddock who could settle the question. But before she could contact him, Mercer reached for the one piece of identification Denise had not yet been forced to produce. "Fine," he said. "Let's do this officially." He pointed at Denise. "Military ID, now." And the moment Michelle had hoped would cool the confrontation instead pushed it toward something far worse. For the first time since Mercer stepped into her path, Denise looked tired. Not weak. Not afraid. Tired. There was the difference. The kind of tired that had nothing to do with the heat pressing down on Fort Braddock or the ache in her knee. It was the exhaustion of being asked, once again, to prove something that should never have required proof in the first place. She looked at Mercer's outstretched hand, then at the brass whistle still trapped in his other fist. "Return my keys." "ID first. You have no authority to confiscate my property." "I'm not confiscating anything." "You took it from my table." Mercer's jaw tightened. Around them the crowd had grown. A retired sergeant with silver hair stood near the edge of the circle, his untouched plate hanging at his side. A civilian contractor in a ball cap had begun recording openly now. Two officers near the barbecue line watched with the rigid posture of people who knew something was wrong, but had not decided whether wrong was enough to make them move. Nobody stepped forward. Jason Miller kept filming. Eric Collins had stopped smiling completely. Michelle Brooks held her own phone low but steady. Denise reached slowly toward the inside pocket of her uniform. Mercer's shoulders tensed. "Easy." Denise's eyes lifted to his. "You asked for identification." He said nothing. She removed the card. No flourish, no angry gesture, just a plain military identification card held between two fingers. Mercer snatched it. Collins closed his eyes for half a second. Michelle saw it. So did Denise. Mercer looked down. The name was clear. Denise M. Carter. He read it once, then again. His eyes moved across the information. Something changed in his face. Not enough for the crowd to see, but close enough for Denise. Recognition was not there. Uncertainty was. A crack. A tiny one. Mercer swallowed. Miller leaned closer. "Well?" Mercer tilted the card away from him. Denise watched. "What does it say?" Collins asked. Mercer ignored him. Miller lowered the phone slightly. Kyle? Mercer's eyes moved back to Denise. These can be faked. The words were so absurdly certain that silence followed them. Collins stared at him. What? You heard me. Mercer lifted the card. Anybody with decent equipment can make something that looks official. Denise's face did not change. Michelle felt her stomach drop. The moment had passed. Mercer had been offered an exit. He had seen evidence. He had felt doubt. And instead of stepping back, he had chosen to protect his pride. That choice changed everything. Denise spoke quietly. You know that's not what you believe. Mercer's face reddened. Don't tell me what I believe. Then stop behaving like a man who's afraid of being wrong. The words struck harder than a shout. Miller shifted his weight. Collins looked toward the ground. Mercer slapped the card down on the wooden picnic table, hard enough to make the keys jump. The brass whistle struck the tabletop with a sharp metallic click. The two foil pans rattled beside it. A woman near the back of the crowd gasped softly. Denise looked at the card, then at Mercer. He had not thrown it into the dirt. He had not torn it. But the gesture carried the contempt clearly enough. The message was the same. Your proof means nothing, because I have already decided who you are. Mercer pulled out his phone. That's it. Collins looked up. What are you doing? Calling military police. Kyle, seriously? Yes, seriously. Collins stepped closer. We can just verify the name. Mercer turned on it. Then they can verify it. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean. Mercer's voice sharpened. You think I should back down because she knows how to talk like command. Collins looked at Denise. She said nothing. That made the silence worse. Miller tried to laugh. This is getting ridiculous. Michelle looked at him. It got ridiculous 10 minutes ago. Miller turned toward her. Excuse me? You heard me. For the first time, someone outside the three-man group had said it plainly. A ripple moved through the crowd. Mercer looked at Michelle. Brooks, stay out of this. Michelle's face hardened. I'm standing 6 yards away in uniform at a military event. I'm already in it. Mercer stared at her, then returned to his phone. He called the MP desk. The line rang, once, twice. Denise reached down and picked up her ID. Her fingers were steady. She slipped it back into place. Then she gathered her keys from the table. Mercer stopped her. Leave the whistle. Denise looked at him. No. It may be relevant. It is not evidence. It might be. For what? Mercer hesitated. The answer did not exist. That did not stop him. For the false representation. Denise held out her hand. Give it back. Mercer kept it. The brass whistle rested in his palm. Raven 17, DCRH hidden against his skin. On the phone, someone answered. Fort Braddock Military Police. Mercer straightened. Yes, this is Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer at the Family Appreciation Area near the main pavilion. I need officers for a suspected false military representation case. Michelle closed her eyes briefly. There it was. Formal now, recorded, escalated beyond a cruel conversation. Mercer continued. Female, mid-50s, wearing Army service uniform, claims prior service. Documentation questionable. Denise looked directly at him. He refused to meet her eyes. Collins whispered, Oh, man. Miller kept filming, but the excitement had gone out of his face. The person on the other end of the call asked something. Mercer answered, No, she's not being physically aggressive. Another pause. No, she hasn't threatened anyone. Pause. Yes, I understand. His face tightened. Just send someone. He ended the call. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Denise said, You were given every opportunity. Mercer shoved the phone back into his pocket. To do what? To correct yourself. I'm doing my job. No. Denise's voice remained calm. You're protecting your pride. Mercer stepped closer. You really think you know me? I know this moment. That stopped to him. Denise looked around the circle. The people watching, the people filming, the people avoiding her eyes. Then she returned her attention to Mercer. I've seen this moment before. A breeze lifted the corner of the foil over the macaroni and cheese. Denise smoothed it back into place. Such a small gesture, ordinary, almost domestic. It made the entire confrontation feel uglier. She had come carrying food. They had turned her into a suspect. Michelle looked down at her phone. Her thumb hovered over Robert Hayes's contact. She still hesitated. Not because she doubted Denise anymore, because she understood what contacting the commander would mean. This would no longer be a misunderstanding. It would become a command problem, a leadership problem, a public failure. Then she looked at Mercer holding Denise's whistle, at Miller's camera, at Collins standing in shame, at the silent crowd. She opened the message window, typed, Sir, do you know Denise Carter from Raven 17? She stared at the words, then pressed send. The message disappeared upward. No taking it back. Across the field, Mercer was still talking. MPs will be here soon. Denise looked at him. I know. You seem awfully calm. I've waited for worse things than military police. Mercer frowned. The answer sounded wrong to him. Too calm, too experienced, too certain. Collins heard it too. He looked at Denise's uniform again. Not as a costume now, as history. Miller shifted the phone in his hand. What happens if they verify her? Mercer looked at him. They won't. But the words came too fast. Michelle heard the doubt. So did Denise. She reached once more for the whistle. Staff Sergeant. Mercer tightened his fingers around it. No. Denise withdrew her hand. Then she said something so quietly that the people nearest her had to lean forward to hear. You are being given one final chance to fix this before someone else has to fix it for you. The sentence landed with no drama, no threat, just certainty. Mercer laughed. But nobody laughed with him. Michelle's phone vibrated in her hand. She looked down. A reply from Colonel Robert Hayes. 4 words. Where is she? Michelle felt the blood drain from her face. She lifted her eyes toward Denise Carter, then toward the whistle in Mercer's hand. And for the first time, she knew. The mistake was no longer coming. It had already happened. Michelle read Hayes's message twice. Where is she? 4 words. No greeting, no question about why Michelle was asking. No hesitation. She typed back. Main family pavilion. East side, near the food tables. Her thumb paused. Then she added, Sir, you should come yourself. She pressed send. Across the grass, Denise stood beside the macaroni and cheese she had brought from Open Table House. Mercer still held her brass whistle. Miller still had his camera pointed toward her. And the crowd was getting larger. People had noticed the tension from across the picnic grounds. They drifted closer in ones and twos, carrying paper plates and plastic cups, forming a loose half-circle beneath the Carolina pines. 20 people, perhaps more. Enough to stop what was happening. Enough to make Mercer think twice. Enough to tell Denise she was not standing alone. Yet nobody moved. A retired sergeant, 69, stood near a cooler with his eyes lowered. A civilian contractor in his 40s held his phone chest high, recording. 2 junior officers whispered to each other, but stayed where they were. An older military spouse folded her arms tightly across her chest. Everyone appeared uncomfortable. Nobody appeared willing to be first. Denise looked around at them. That hurt more than Mercer's suspicion. She understood arrogance. She understood prejudice. She understood the way some people mistook confidence for proof. But silence was different. Silence gave bad behavior room to grow. Mercer glanced toward the crowd and seemed to draw strength from the fact that no one had challenged him. "MPs are coming," he announced. Denise nodded once. "I heard you. You'll need to remain here. I'm standing here. Don't make this difficult." Something almost like disbelief crossed Denise's face. "Staff Sergeant, I brought macaroni and cheese to a family event. You took my property, questioned my service, rejected my identification, and called military police. I am not the person making this difficult." Someone in the crowd exhaled sharply. Mercer turned toward the sound. Nobody claimed it. Miller's camera shifted across the spectators and returned to Denise. "Could you state your full name again for the record?" Denise looked at him. "You already filmed my identification. I'm asking you." "And I'm declining." Miller shrugged toward the camera. "See? Uncooperative." That was when Collins finally looked at him. "Jason, stop." Miller lowered the phone a fraction. "What? She's not uncooperative." Mercer turned. "Collins." But Collins continued. "She answered us. She showed ID. She hasn't tried to leave. She hasn't threatened anybody." His voice was not strong. Not yet. But for the first time it was clear. "Sarge, she hasn't done anything." The crowd went quieter. Denise looked at Collins. He had expected gratitude. Instead, he saw disappointment. Not anger. That would have been easier. Her expression seemed to ask a question he did not want to answer. Why did it take this long? Mercer stepped toward him. "You done?" Collins swallowed. "I'm just saying we should verify before..." "Before what?" "Before this gets worse." Mercer laughed. "Too late to get weak knees now." Collins's eyes moved toward the ground. Mercer pointed at him. "You were standing right here when we approached her." Collins said nothing. "You laughed." Collins's face reddened. Denise heard it. So did everyone else. Mercer continued. "You thought it looked wrong too." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Collins opened his mouth, closed it. There it was again. Silence. Only now Collins could feel what silence cost. Denise looked away from him. That hurt worse than if she had condemned him. A gust of wind pushed barbecue smoke across the pavilion. For a moment the scene blurred behind a thin gray veil. Denise smelled charcoal, pepper, hot metal, and suddenly, beneath those smells, came another memory. Rain, wet earth, canvas, a training field 20 years earlier. She pushed it away. Not yet. Mercer rolled the brass whistle across his palm. "What is so special about this thing anyway?" Denise's eyes snapped back to him. "Give it to me. You keep saying that. And you keep making the wrong choice." Miller raised his camera again. Mercer turned the whistle over. RH. He rubbed the initials with his thumb. "Maybe we should figure out who this belongs to." "It belongs to me." "Then who's RH?" Denise remained silent. Mercer grinned. "That what I thought." Michelle felt anger rise in her chest. She knew enough now to intervene, but she also knew Hayes was coming, and she needed the record intact. Not only Mercer, the crowd, the hesitation, the way people looked at one another waiting for somebody else to act. Michelle kept filming. A woman near her whispered, "Should somebody say something?" Michelle turned. The woman looked embarrassed. "You just did." The woman blinked, then looked toward Denise, but she did not step forward. Denise saw that too. Every almost, every hesitation, every person whose conscience reached the edge of action and stopped there. She had spent years training leaders to recognize those moments. Courage rarely arrived looking dramatic. Sometimes it was simply the first voice saying no. And somehow that was often the hardest voice to find. Mercer checked his watch. "MPs should be here in a few minutes." Denise said nothing. "You worried now?" "No." "You should be." Denise looked at him. "Why?" Mercer seemed surprised by the question. Because if that uniform isn't legitimate, and if it is, the sentence cut him off. Mercer stared at her. Denise continued. What happens then? His mouth tightened. That's not the situation. You don't know what the situation is. I know enough. No, you decided enough. That distinction hung in the air. Even Miller lowered the phone slightly. Denise looked around the circle again. This is how it happens. Mercer frowned. How what happens? Someone decides who another person is before learning anything about them. She looked toward the people watching. Then everyone else waits to see whether it becomes safe to object. No one moved. Her voice remained quiet. That waiting is a choice too. The retired sergeant finally lifted his eyes. The contractor lowered his phone. One of the junior officers shifted forward, then stopped. Collins looked sick. Denise had not raised her voice. She had not demanded sympathy. She had simply described the room accurately, and that made everyone inside it responsible for where they were standing. Mercer scoffed. Spare us the lecture. Denise looked back at him. I wasn't speaking only to you. Michelle's phone vibrated. She glanced down. Hayes, on my way. Her heartbeat quickened. She put the phone away. Mercer noticed. Who are you texting? Michelle met his eyes. Someone who may know what Raven 17 means. For the first time, Mercer's confidence visibly faltered. What? Miller turned toward her. You know what that is? I know someone who does. Collins looked at the whistle, then at Denise. Who? Michelle did not answer. Mercer laughed, but it sounded forced. This is getting ridiculous. He turned the whistle again, exposing the letters. R.H. What? Is this supposed to impress somebody? Denise looked at those initials. The hard line in her face softened for the briefest moment. Sadness entered her eyes. Michelle saw it. So did Collins. Whatever those letters meant, they did not represent status to Denise. They represented a person, a moment, a debt remembered across 2 decades. Then Mercer made the mistake of noticing that sadness. He mistook it for embarrassment. R.H., he said. What is that? Some old boyfriend? Denise became completely still. Michelle lowered her phone half an inch. Collins whispered, Sarge, don't. But Mercer had already chosen the next step, and as the dented brass whistle turned between his fingers, Denise was no longer seeing the sunny pavilion at Fort Braddock. She was seeing rain hammering a training field 20 years earlier. A 27-year-old lieutenant named Robert Hayes was standing in the darkness, shaken after a training accident had injured a 26-year-old candidate. His hands were trembling. His judgment was failing. And Master Sergeant Denise Carter was about to place that same brass whistle into his hand. The rain had come down so hard that night it erased the horizon. 20 years earlier, the Raven Leadership Course training field had been nothing but black trees, mud, canvas shelters, and the pale sweep of flashlights cutting through sheets of water. Denise Carter was 34 then, already known among instructors for a voice that never needed to rise. Robert Hayes was 27, a first lieutenant with strong evaluations, quick instincts, and one dangerous weakness. He believed good leaders were supposed to look certain all the time. That night, certainty failed him. The exercise had been designed to do exactly that. Raven 17 had been sent into a simulated evacuation scenario after dark. Rain turned the trail slick. Visibility dropped to a few yards. A training vehicle became stuck near a drainage ditch, and one of the candidates, 26 years old, slipped while helping reposition equipment. The fall was not catastrophic, but it was serious enough. The injured candidate lay in the mud gripping his leg, while the rest of the team looked toward Hayes, waiting. He was in charge. The rain hammered his helmet. Someone shouted for instructions. Another candidate asked whether they should move the injured man. A radio crackled with incomplete information. Hayes looked from one face to another, then froze. Only for seconds. But seconds were enough. His breathing changed. His hands began to tremble. The confident young officer who had spent the previous week answering every classroom question first suddenly could not decide which order should come first. Denise saw it from 10 yards away. She did not rush in. Not immediately. That would have saved Hayes from the moment instead of teaching him through it. She walked toward him through ankle-deep mud. "Lieutenant," Hayes turned. "Master Sergeant, I need—" "No!" The word stopped him. Rain ran from the edge of Denise's cap. "You need to breathe. We have an injured man." "I know. The vehicle is stuck. I know. Communication is breaking down. I know that too." Hayes stared at her. Frustration flashed across his face. "Then tell me what to do." Denise looked past him toward the team. Everyone was watching. She lowered her voice. "If I tell you, who is leading them?" Hayes looked back at the candidates. Nobody moved. His embarrassment deepened. "I'm trying. I know. I don't know what the right call is." "That's different." He looked at her. "Different from what?" "Not knowing what to do is not the same as being incapable of leading." The rain beat against the leaves. Denise reached into the pocket of her wet field jacket and pulled out a brass whistle. Newer then, shinier. The dent along the edge had not yet been made. Raven 17, DC, had been stamped into one side. She placed it in Hayes's palm. He stared at it. "What am I supposed to do with this?" "Nothing." His confusion sharpened. Denise closed his fingers around the whistle. "Feel it." Hayes looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Master Sergeant." "Feel it." He did. Cold brass, solid, real, something small enough to fit inside a fist. Denise watched his breathing. "Breathe first." He inhaled. Too fast. Again, he tried. Slower. The third breath was better. Then the fourth. The tremor in his hand eased. Denise nodded toward his team. "Now look at them." Hayes did. Not at the problem, at the people, the injured candidate. The two exhausted soldiers waiting for direction. The radio operator shielding the handset from the rain. The driver standing beside the stuck vehicle. People. Not a test. Not an evaluation. People depending on him. Denise said quietly, "Calm first. Command second." Hayes looked at her. She repeated it. "Calm first. Command second." Something settled in him. He turned. "Mitchell, stay with the injured man. Keep him still and covered." The candidate moved immediately. "Reed, get medical support on the secondary frequency. Tell them we need extraction at marker 4. Another candidate grabbed the radio. "Jackson, forget the vehicle. We leave the equipment. People first." The team moved. Orders became motion. Motion became control. Within minutes, the injured candidate was stabilized, and the rest of the exercise resumed around him. Denise stepped back into the rain. She did not congratulate Hayes. Not that night. He had done what he was supposed to do. That mattered more than praise. Later, after the medical team cleared the injured candidate for recovery, Hayes found Denise beneath a canvas awning. She was writing notes on a clipboard. Her sleeves were soaked. Mud covered the lower half of her boots. Hayes held out the whistle. "I think this is yours." Denise glanced at it. "Keep it until morning." "Why?" "Because you're not finished learning from it." He gave a tired laugh. "I nearly failed the whole exercise." "No." I froze. "Yes, that sounds like failure." Denise looked at him. "You think leadership means never freezing?" Hayes said nothing. "It means recognizing it before everyone freezes with you." He looked down at the whistle. Denise returned to her notes. "You recovered. Because you helped me. I reminded you." "That's the same thing." "No, Lieutenant." She looked up again. "If I had saved you, you would need me next time." That sentence stayed with him. The following morning, the storm had passed. Mist hung low over the training field. Hayes found Denise near the equipment racks. He handed the whistle back. This time, there were 2 letters scratched into the reverse side. RH. Denise frowned. What did you do? Hayes looked almost embarrassed. Made sure you remembered who almost ruined Raven 17. Denise examined the rough initials. You think I forget my students that easily? No. Then why mark my whistle? Hayes smiled. So when I become a general someday, you can prove you knew me before I got difficult. Denise laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came rarely during training. You've got a long road before general. I know. Start by surviving lieutenant. Yes, Master Sergeant. She slipped the whistle into her pocket. Neither of them knew then how long she would keep it. Neither knew that 2 decades later, Hayes would command soldiers on the same installation where someone would hold that whistle in his hand and mock the initials carved into its back. The memory dissolved. Carolina sunlight replaced rain. The smell of wet canvas became barbecue smoke. Denise was 54 again. Kyle Mercer stood in front of her, turning the same whistle between his fingers. RH, he said. What, some old boyfriend? Denise looked at him. All the tenderness left her face. Be careful. Mercer grinned. With what? With things you don't understand. Behind him, Michelle Brooks looked toward the far end of the picnic grounds. People were moving aside. Fast. A man in a dark polo shirt was crossing the grass with long, urgent strides. Colonel Robert Hayes. He was not walking casually. He was coming straight toward them. Michelle's pulse jumped. Collins noticed him next. His face changed. Sarge. Mercer did not turn. What now? Collins swallowed. Commander. That got Mercer's attention. He looked over his shoulder. Hayes was 50 yards away and closing. Mercer's posture changed immediately. His shoulders came back. His chin lifted. Relief moved across his face. He believed help had arrived. He believed his commander was coming to confirm everything he had said. Miller raised the camera higher. Mercer gave Denise a small, satisfied smile. Looks like we're about to settle this. Denise said nothing. Hayes came closer. 40 yards. 30. Then his eyes found Denise. His pace changed. Not slower, faster. He saw the uniform, saw Mercer, saw the crowd. Then he saw the brass whistle in Mercer's hand. Robert Hayes stopped dead. Even from 20 yards away, Michelle saw the color drain from his face. Mercer did not. He was already stepping forward to meet him. Sir, Mercer called, we've got a possible false military representation situation. Hayes did not answer. He was staring at the whistle, at the dented brass, at the 2 letters carved into the back, RH. And for the first time in the entire confrontation, Kyle Mercer was about to discover that the person standing in front of him was not the one who needed to prove who she was. Colonel Robert Hayes crossed the last 20 yards in silence. The crowd opened for him almost automatically. No one told them to move. They simply did. Mercer straightened his back. Miller adjusted his grip on the phone. Collins looked as though someone had quietly removed the ground beneath his boots. Denise remained where she was. Hayes stopped 3 feet from Mercer. His eyes never touched the staff sergeant's face. They stayed on the whistle. Sir, Mercer began, we have reason to believe this woman is... Hayes held out his hand. Give me that. Mercer blinked. Sir? The whistle. The change in his voice was subtle, but every soldier there heard it. Command was no longer a title. It was present in the air. Mercer placed the whistle in Hayes's palm. Hayes did not look at anyone. He turned the brass over. Raven 17, DC, then the reverse. RH. His thumb stopped on the scratched letters. For one long second, the commander of Fort Braddock's unit stood completely still. The field around him disappeared. The barbecue smoke, the tables, the cameras, the silent crowd. All of it gave way to rain, mud, a trembling hand 20 years earlier. Calm first, command second. Hayes breathed in slowly, then looked at Denise. The expression on his face was not surprise alone. It was recognition, respect, and something close to shame. Not shame for himself, shame for the fact that she had been standing there long enough for him to be needed. "I carved those letters," he said. The words were quiet. Mercer frowned. Miller's phone tilted. "What?" Mercer asked. Hayes turned the whistle so the crowd could see the initials. "I carved these letters into this whistle 20 years ago." Nobody moved. Hayes stepped past Mercer. Then he faced Denise. His posture changed. Shoulders squared, feet set. The same young officer who had once stood shaking in the rain was gone. But the lesson remained. Hayes raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Master Sergeant Denise Carter." The silence broke. Not into applause, into breath. A collective inhale from people finally understanding that the woman they had watched being questioned was not what Mercer had claimed. Denise looked at Hayes. For a moment, something warm moved through her eyes. Then she returned the salute. Briefly, cleanly. No performance, no triumph. Hayes lowered his hand. "It's been too long." Denise gave him a small nod. "It has." Mercer stared between them. "Sir, Hayes turned. The warmth vanished. "You what?" Mercer's mouth opened. Closed. He tried again. "We were trying to verify a possible false representation." Hayes looked at him. "By taking her property?" Mercer swallowed. "Sir, there were inconsistencies." "What inconsistencies?" "The vehicle, the way she arrived, the—" He stopped. Too late. Everyone had heard enough. Hayes's expression hardened. "The vehicle?" Mercer said nothing. Hayes looked toward the old Ford visible at the far end of the lot. Then back at him. "You decided her service record was false because of the car she drove?" "No, sir." "Then explain." Mercer glanced toward Miller. No help there. Miller looked pale. Collins stared at the grass. Mercer cleared his throat. "She was wearing a uniform we didn't recognize." Hayes's voice became colder. "You didn't recognize her?" Mercer hesitated. "That's different." "Yes, sir." "It is very different." Hayes turned slightly and addressed the crowd without raising his voice. "Master Sergeant Carter trained me before any of these 3 soldiers entered the army." A murmur moved through the circle. Hayes continued. "Raven Leadership Course, Class 17. He held up the whistle. "This belonged to her then. It belongs to her now." His gaze returned to Mercer. "She was my senior instructor." Miller slowly lowered the phone. Hayes looked at him. "Keep recording." Miller froze. Sir? You wanted a record. Finish it." His hand tightened around the phone. "Yes, sir." Hayes stepped closer to Mercer. "When I was 27 years old, I froze during a field exercise after a training accident." The retired sergeant in the crowd lifted his head. Hayes did not look away from Mercer. "Master Sergeant Carter did not humiliate me. She did not shout at me. She did not take over and make me look small in front of my team." Denise's face remained still. Hayes held up the whistle. "She put this in my hand and reminded me that leadership starts with control of yourself." Mercer's jaw tightened. Hayes's voice softened. "That lesson has followed me for 20 years. He looked at Denise. "I would not be the commander I am without it." Denise shook her head slightly. "You did the work." Hayes almost smiled. "Still correcting me." A few people in the crowd exhaled nervous laughter. The tension shifted. Only slightly. But enough to remind everyone that Denise was a person, not a symbol. Then Hayes turned back to the 3 soldiers. Mercer looked as if he wanted to disappear into his own uniform. Miller's camera shook. Collins looked sick. Hayes pointed toward Denise's military ID on the table, saw. Who put that there? Mercer answered. I did, sir. Why? I thought it might be fraudulent. After reading it? Mercer paused. Yes, sir. Hayes's expression became unreadable. You saw her name? Yes, sir. You saw that the identification was legitimate? I wasn't sure. Did you verify it? No, sir. Did you ask anyone with authority before accusing her? No, sir. Did you call military police? Mercer looked at the ground. Yes, sir. Hayes waited. Mercer looked up again. The crowd was no longer giving him anonymity. Every face was visible now. Every witness. Every person who had watched. Hayes stepped back. Specialist Collins? Collins snapped to attention. Sir, were you part of this? The question hit him harder than he expected. I was standing here. That wasn't my question. Collins swallowed. Yes, sir. His voice cracked slightly. I was part of it. Denise looked at him. This time he did not look away. Hayes nodded once, not approvingly, simply acknowledging the truth. Then he turned to Miller. Sergeant. Sir. You filmed the entire interaction? Yes, sir. From the beginning? Miller hesitated. Yes, sir. Good. Miller looked confused. Hayes's face did not change. That video may be the most honest thing any of you have done this morning. Miller went pale. Mercer looked at Denise. For the first time since he approached her, there was no arrogance left, only fear. Master Sergeant Carter, he said quietly, I didn't know who you were. Denise held his gaze. There it was, the sentence everyone expected, the excuse hidden inside the apology. I didn't know who you were. Hayes heard it too. He turned toward Mercer. But that is not why you were wrong. The words stopped everything. Mercer stared at him. Denise's expression changed. Just a fraction. Not surprise. Approval. Hayes looked around the crowd, at the people who had filmed, at the people who had stared, at the people who had nearly spoken, and at the people who had waited for rank to make decency safe. Then he said the sentence that would change the meaning of the entire morning. If Denise Carter had never served one day in the United States Army, you would still have been wrong to treat her this way. Mercer looked down. Miller's phone continued recording. Collins closed his eyes. The retired sergeant near the cooler finally removed his cap. Hayes held out the whistle. Denise took it. Their fingers touched for barely a second. 20 years between them. Rain and sunlight, lieutenant and colonel, instructor and commander. Denise closed her hand around the brass. Then she looked at Hayes. Robert, he straightened. Yes? Don't investigate only what happened to me. Hayes's brow furrowed. Denise looked at Mercer, then Miller, then Collins, then the silent crowd. Find out who stood where I'm standing before today. Hayes said nothing. Denise continued. Someone who didn't have a raven whistle. Her eyes moved across the field. Someone who didn't know the commander. The question spread through the crowd more powerfully than any accusation. Mercer's face changed again, and this time, Laura Bennett had not yet opened a single file. But somewhere in Fort Braddock's records, an old complaint was waiting. A complaint from Sergeant Angela Price. A complaint someone had decided did not matter. And Denise Carter had just given Robert Hayes a reason to find it. The barbecue did not recover, not really. The grills still smoked, ice still cracked inside coolers, paper plates still bent under the weight of food. Somewhere near the far pavilion, a speaker kept playing music until someone finally walked over and turned it down. But the mood had changed. People who had been laughing 20 minutes earlier now stood with their hands at their sides. People who had been filming lowered their phones. And people who had said nothing were suddenly very aware of how visible silence could become. Hayes looked at Mercer, then Miller, then Collins. "Remain here." "Yes, sir," Mercer said. His voice sounded smaller now. Military police arrived less than 5 minutes later, not with sirens or spectacle, but in a white patrol vehicle that rolled slowly across the edge of the field. 2 officers stepped out. Hayes met them halfway. He spoke quietly. No shouting, no public humiliation. That mattered to Denise. Even now, after everything, she did not want cruelty answered with more cruelty. Mercer had made his choices. The system would deal with them. That was enough. One of the MPs approached Miller. "I need the phone you used to record the incident." Miller gripped it. "For how long?" "Until the footage is secured." He looked at Hayes. Hayes said nothing. Miller handed it over. The screen was still warm from recording. The device that had begun as a joke had become evidence. Collins watched it leave Miller's hand and seemed to understand the symbolism immediately. Mercer stood rigid. He still looked as though he was waiting for some final explanation that would make the morning less serious than it had become. Denise did not give him one. Instead, she lifted the foil on one tray of macaroni and cheese. Steam rose into the sunlight. Helen had added paprika across the top. Denise stared at it for a second. An absurdly normal thing in an abnormal morning. Hayes came to stand beside her. "You okay?" Denise glanced at him. "You asking as commander or former student?" "Whichever gets an honest answer." She almost smiled. "My knee hurts," Hayes nodded. "Still, every time the weather changes." "That wasn't what I meant." "I know." She replaced the foil. The quiet between them carried 20 years. Then Hayes said, "I'm sorry." Denise looked at him. "For what?" "That this happened here." "This didn't start here." He understood. That was exactly why she had told him to look backward. Hayes glanced toward the 3 soldiers. "You think there's more?" "I think people rarely become comfortable doing something in public the first time they do it." That answer stayed with him. By noon, the family event had begun thinning out. Denise refused an escort home. She carried the emptying food trays back to her Ford herself. Before leaving, Michelle Brooks caught up with her near the parking lot. "Master Sergeant Carter." Denise turned. Michelle stood there holding her phone but not recording. "I knew the name Raven," she said. "Not yours, just the course." Denise nodded. "I remembered Colonel Hayes talking about it." "That sounds like Robert." Michelle hesitated. "I should have stepped in sooner." Denise studied her. "You documented it." "I also watched." "Yes." Michelle swallowed. The answer was not comfort, but it was honest. Denise continued. "There are moments when recording is necessary." Michelle nodded. "And moments when someone needs a voice." "I understand. Make sure you know which one you're in next time." Michelle's eyes lowered. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Denise touched her shoulder. Not as forgiveness, as instruction. Then she walked away. The formal review began that afternoon. Captain Laura Bennett arrived at Fort Braddock's legal office carrying a leather folder and 2 cups of coffee, one of which went cold before she remembered it existed. Laura was 41, deliberate, patient, and known for refusing to confuse rank with credibility. The first thing she watched was Miller's video, then Michelle's. The angles were different. Miller's footage was close, personal. Mercer's expressions were clear. His laughter, the whistle in his hand, the moment he rejected Denise's identification. Michelle's video was wider. It captured something Miller's camera did not. The crowd, the people watching, the empty space between Denise and everyone who could have stepped forward. Laura replayed that part twice. Then she opened Mercer's personnel history. At first, nothing seemed extraordinary. Strong fitness scores, competent evaluations, no major disciplinary actions. Then she found a notation attached to an old supervisory review. Closed interpersonal complaint. Laura clicked deeper. The file had been archived 18 months earlier. Complainant, Sergeant Angela Price, 32. Laura leaned closer to the screen. Angela had alleged that Mercer repeatedly used humiliating language during a training cycle, singled her out in front of junior personnel, and told her she was too sensitive for leadership. The complaint had been closed after an informal review. Reason? Personality conflict. Laura frowned. There were no witness interviews attached, no follow-up statement, no detailed findings, just a supervisor's note recommending local resolution. She wrote one word on a yellow pad. Why? Then she called Angela. Angela answered on the fourth ring. Sergeant Price. This is Captain Laura Bennett, Fort Braddock Legal. I'm reviewing an older complaint you filed regarding Staff Sergeant Kyle Mercer. Silence. Long enough that Laura thought the call had dropped. Then Angela said, Why? Because a new incident has raised questions. Another silence. Angela's voice changed. Did he do it again? Laura looked at the frozen frame on her monitor. Denise standing beside two foil pans. Mercer holding the whistle. 20 people behind them. Yes, Laura said. I believe he did. Angela exhaled. Not surprise, recognition. I told them. Laura looked at the old file. I know. No, Captain. I mean, I told them exactly what he was like. Her voice remained controlled, but anger lived underneath it. They said I took things personally. They said Kyle was rough around the edges. They said maybe I needed to develop thicker skin. Laura's pen stopped. Who told you that? Angela gave her a name. Laura wrote it down, a senior supervisor still assigned to the unit. Still in leadership, the investigation had just widened. By evening, Miller had been interviewed. At first, he described the incident as a joke that got out of hand. Then Laura asked whether he had ever recorded Mercer behaving similarly before. Miller looked toward the table. His silence lasted too long. Laura noticed. Sergeant Miller? He swallowed. There's another video. Where? My cloud backup. Laura sat straighter. What's on it? Miller rubbed his palms together. It was maybe 8 months ago, training area. Mercer was going after somebody. Who? A junior soldier, 24. Name? I'd have to check. Did you report it? No. Why not? Miller stared at the floor. I thought it was funny at the time. The answer sounded horrible even to him. Laura did not react. Get me the video. Collins came in next. He looked exhausted. Laura asked whether he had ever seen Mercer cross a line before. Collins answered too quickly. No, ma'am. Laura waited. Silence. Then she slid a copy of his preliminary statement across the table. You wrote that you were surprised by today's behavior. Yes, ma'am. You sure? Collins looked at the paper. His throat tightened. No. Laura said nothing. He closed his eyes. I saw something before. When? Couple months back. What happened? Mercer embarrassed a junior soldier in front of everyone. Kept pushing after he should have stopped. What did you do? Collins stared at his own hands. Nothing. Did you report it? No. Why? His answer was barely audible. I didn't want to be the problem. Laura leaned back. And today? Collins looked up. I became part of it anyway. For the first time all day, Laura's expression softened, only slightly. That's honest. It doesn't make it better. No, Collins nodded. I know. Later that night, Hayes stood alone in his office. The lights were off except for a desk lamp. Denise's words kept returning. Find out who stood where I'm standing before today. Laura entered with a folder. Hayes looked at her face. You found something? Yes. How bad? Laura placed the file in front of him. Bad enough that today may not be the beginning of the problem. Hayes opened it. Angela Price. 18 months ago. Closed. No real investigation. His jaw tightened. Who closed this? Laura told him. Hayes looked up slowly. The name belonged to a leader he trusted. Someone still supervising soldiers. The consequences had just moved beyond Mercer, beyond Miller, beyond Collins, beyond one ugly morning at a barbecue. Hayes stared at the old complaint, then at the note calling it a personality conflict. Cross town, Denise sat at her kitchen table with the brass whistle beside her coffee cup. She did not know what Laura had found yet, but she had been right. Someone else had stood in that place before her. Someone without a raven whistle. Someone without the commander's number. And this time, the system would have to answer for why nobody had listened. The investigation lasted 5 weeks. By the end of the first, Fort Braddock had stopped treating the barbecue as an isolated incident. By the end of the third, nobody was calling it a misunderstanding. And by the fifth, the question was no longer whether Kyle Mercer had crossed a line. The question was how many people had watched him approach that line before and decided it was easier not to see it. Captain Laura Bennett built the case slowly. No dramatic raids, no shouting behind closed doors. Just interviews, timestamps, archived messages, old evaluation notes, and video. Especially video. Jason Miller's old cloud recording showed Mercer humiliating a 24-year-old soldier during a training exercise months earlier. The soldier had made a routine mistake. Mercer corrected it, then kept going long after the correction had served any useful purpose. Miller had filmed it. People had laughed. Collins had been there. Nobody reported it. Then came Angela Price. She walked into Laura's office on a gray Tuesday morning, carrying a thin folder beneath one arm. At 32, Angela had learned to document everything. Dates, names, locations, exact words when she could remember them. She placed the folder on Laura's desk. I kept copies. Laura opened it. Inside were emails Angela had sent 18 months earlier asking for updates on her complaint. The first received a brief response. The second received none. The third had been forwarded back to the supervisor who had already dismissed the matter as a personality conflict. Angela sat with her hands folded tightly. I started wondering whether I had imagined it. Laura looked up. You didn't. Angela's eyes shone, but she refused to look away. I know that now. There was no triumph in her voice, only grief for the 18 months she had spent questioning herself. That was the damage nobody could put neatly into a disciplinary report. The senior supervisor who had closed Angela's complaint was removed from personnel oversight, while a separate command review examined his decisions. He insisted he had been trying to resolve conflict informally. Laura asked one question. Did you interview her witnesses? He did not have an answer. Shaw, did you review the messages she submitted? Silence. Did you ask whether Mercer had similar complaints? Again, silence. A pattern had not been invisible. It had simply been inconvenient. Mercer's disciplinary process came next. The outcome did not erase 14 years of service, and Denise never asked that it should. But service did not purchase immunity from accountability. Mercer was removed from supervisory duties and reduced in rank following the disciplinary proceedings. The leadership track he had spent years pursuing effectively ended. When the decision was read, Mercer sat without speaking. For once, he did not argue. He had seen the videos, he had heard Angela, he had watched Collins admit what he knew, and he had watched his own face on Miller's recording as Denise gave him chance after chance to stop. Afterward, he asked whether Denise would meet with him. The request reached her through Hayes. She declined. Not angrily. She doesn't owe me that, Mercer said when Hayes told him. It was the first thing Hayes had heard from him that sounded like understanding. Jason Miller received disciplinary action for his role in the humiliation and for repeatedly using recording as a way to encourage, rather than interrupt, degrading conduct. The irony followed him everywhere. The camera he had raised because he expected entertainment became the clearest record of his own choices. During his final interview, Laura asked why he kept filming. Miller stared at the table. Why? I thought people would laugh. At her? He nodded. And when they stopped laughing? Miller was quiet. I should have stopped too. Laura closed the folder. You should have done more than stop filming. Miller looked down. Yes, ma'am. Colin's consequence was different. He received a formal reprimand. It would follow him, he knew that. But unlike Mercer, Collins did not contest the finding. He signed the acknowledgement and sat staring at his own name beneath the words, failure to act. It looked so small on paper. At the barbecue, it had felt small too. A nervous laugh, a lowered head, hands in pockets, a decision to let somebody else be brave. Now he understood how those small choices could build a wall around the person standing alone. I kept thinking I wasn't doing anything, he told Laura. That was the problem, she said. Angela Price received a formal acknowledgement from command that her complaint had not been handled properly. Hayes apologized to her personally, not because he had closed the complaint. He had not. But because it happened inside a command structure he now represented. Angela listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, I don't need anybody to tell me I was right. Hayes nodded. What do you need? I need the next person not to wait 18 months. That sentence became the center of the reforms that followed. Complaint procedures were revised. Supervisory reviews required documented witness follow-up. Leaders were instructed that informal resolution could not become a convenient graveyard for repeated misconduct. But Denise rejected the idea of turning the incident into a campaign about recognizing important people. When reporters began calling Open Table House, she stopped answering unknown numbers. A regional television station offered a studio interview. She declined. A national program offered to send a crew to Fayetteville. She declined that too. Finally, after the requests would not stop, she wrote one statement. Hayes read it alone in his office. Michelle read it during lunch. Angela read it at her kitchen table. Even Mercer eventually saw a printed copy. It said, I don't want people to learn how to recognize who has power. I want them to learn how to treat people with dignity before they know who that person is. That was all. No attack. No victory speech. No mention of Raven 17. No mention of Hayes. That evening, Denise was back at Open Table House. Warm yellow light filled the kitchen. Pots simmered. Helen stood beside a stainless steel counter dividing cornbread into portions. Arthur Lewis, 72, sat near the doorway with a cup of coffee, arguing cheerfully that the clinic had exaggerated how much salt he needed to avoid. They did not exaggerate, Denise said. Arthur frowned. You weren't in the room. I drove you there. That doesn't make you my doctor. No, it makes me the person who watched you put 3 packets of salt on eggs last Sunday. Helen laughed. Arthur surrendered the salt shaker. Denise carried a bowl of soup to him. No cameras, no applause, no uniforms except the one folded at home. Arthur looked up. Saw your name in the paper. Denise sighed. I was hoping you missed that. Hard to miss. She set the bowl down. Arthur studied her. You doing all right? Denise paused, then nodded. I'm getting there. It was more honest than saying yes. Later, when the kitchen quieted, Helen found Denise standing by the sink. You ever wish you'd told them who you were sooner? Denise looked through the window at a city bus groaning to a stop beneath the streetlight. No. Why? Because then they might have learned the wrong lesson. Helen waited. Denise dried her hands. If Mercer had stopped because he found out I trained Robert, All he would have learned was to be careful around important people. And now? Denise looked toward Arthur eating soup at the table. Maybe somebody learned to be careful with people. 6 months passed. Fall softened the Carolina heat. Then winter came. One cold morning, an envelope arrived at Denise's rented house in East Fayetteville. Fort Braddock letterhead. She opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was an invitation from Colonel Robert Hayes. Denise read it twice, then called him. "You're serious?" "Completely. I told you I don't want another medal." "It isn't a medal. I don't want a ceremony about the barbecue either." "It isn't about the barbecue." Denise looked at the brass whistle beside her keys. "What did you do, Robert?" Hayes laughed softly. "For once, Master Sergeant, just show up and let me surprise you." Denise shook her head. "You were easier to manage at 27. That is absolutely not true. It absolutely is." When the call ended, Denise picked up the invitation again. Fort Braddock wanted her back. Not to pin another decoration on her chest. Not to apologize again. Not even to honor what she had survived. They wanted to recognize something she had done long before anyone at that barbecue knew her name. Something Robert Hayes had carried for 20 years. And when Denise finally saw what was waiting inside the old Raven training building, she would understand that the little brass whistle had changed more than one commander. 6 months after the barbecue, Denise Carter returned to Fort Braddock on a cold Carolina morning. This time she wore no uniform. Just a navy coat, dark slacks, and comfortable shoes that did not argue with her left knee. Her old Ford was still the same. So was Denise. When the guard waved her through, she drove toward the Raven training area and automatically turned toward regular parking. A young staff sergeant in a reflective vest stepped into the lane. "Ms. Carter?" "Yes?" "Colonel Hayes reserved a space for you up front." Denise looked toward the marked parking area, then toward the ordinary lot. "I appreciate that." The soldier waited. Denise smiled. "I'll park over there." She pointed toward the regular spaces. The staff sergeant hesitated, then smiled back. "Yes, ma'am." Denise parked beneath a pine tree and walked. Some things, she believed, should remain ordinary. The old Raven building stood at the edge of the training grounds, a low brick structure with narrow windows and a flag snapping in the winter wind. Hayes waited outside. At 47, he carried command more comfortably than the 27-year-old lieutenant Denise remembered. But when he saw her approaching, something younger returned to his face. "You parked in the regular lot." "Of course. I gave you a space. I saw it. You ignored it. I appreciated it." Hayes laughed. "There she is." He opened the door. Warm air met them inside. So did the murmur of voices. Denise stopped. Nearly 100 adults filled the hallway and adjoining classroom. Soldiers, retirees, civilian employees, several former Raven instructors. Angela Price stood near the front. Michelle Brooks was there too. Denise turned slowly toward Hayes. "You said this wasn't a ceremony." "I may have used a flexible definition." "Robert, just come inside." He led her down the hallway. At the end stood a classroom Denise remembered. Years earlier, it had contained dented metal desks, faded maps, and a whiteboard that never erased completely. Now the walls had been refinished. New tables filled the room. Leadership books lined one shelf. On another wall hung photographs documenting generations of Raven instructors and graduates. A dark cloth covered a plaque beside the door. Denise saw it, then looked at Hayes. "No. You don't even know what it says." "I know that look." "What look?" "The one you had right before making bad decisions at 27. Someone behind them laughed. Hayes shook his head. "Some things never change." He stepped toward the small gathering. There was no stage. Denise noticed that immediately. No spotlights, no giant portrait of her. Hayes had listened. He waited until the room settled. 20 years ago, he began. I came through Raven believing leadership meant having the answer before anyone else. Denise folded her arms. Hayes glanced at her. I was wrong. More laughter. This time Denise smiled. During a night exercise, one of our candidates was injured. I froze. Master Sergeant Denise Carter did not take command away from me. She did something much harder. Hayes reached into his pocket. He did not have the whistle. Denise did. It hung beside her keys inside her coat pocket. She made me regain command of myself. The room quieted. She told me, calm first, command second. I have repeated those words to soldiers for 20 years. Hayes looked around the room. But 6 months ago, this installation learned another lesson from her. Denise's smile disappeared. Hayes did not describe the humiliation. He did not repeat Mercer's words. He did not turn her worst moment into entertainment. Instead, he said, we learned that respect offered only after discovering someone's rank is not respect. Michelle lowered her eyes. Angela watched without moving. We learned that leadership is measured most clearly when there is no reward for doing the right thing. Hayes reached for the cloth. And we learned that institutions have to listen before the person being mistreated turns out to know the commander. He pulled it away. The plaque underneath read, Carter Leadership Room, calm first. Command second. Character before status. For several seconds, Denise said nothing. Her eyes moved across the words. Not her decorations, not her rank, not the incident. The lesson. That was what they had preserved. Hayes spoke quietly. This room will be used for leadership instruction. Every Raven candidate who comes through Fort Braddock will sit in here. Denise touched the edge of the plaque. You could have just put the lesson up. We did. He pointed to her name. Denise looked at him. Hayes smiled. That's where it came from. Applause began behind her. Softly, Denise turned. Angela Price was clapping. Michelle joined her. Then the room. Denise accepted it without raising her hands or bowing her head. When the sound faded, she spoke. I appreciate this. She looked at the plaque again. But if this room becomes a place where people memorize a sentence and forget it outside that door, take my name off it. The room became completely quiet. Denise faced them. Leadership isn't what you say in a classroom. Her eyes moved from uniform to uniform. It's what you do when somebody is being embarrassed and everyone else is waiting for permission to care. Michelle swallowed. Angela nodded. Denise continued. And dignity is not something rank gives you. She paused. It's something we owe each other before we know anything else. No applause followed immediately. Denise was glad. Some words deserved silence first. Afterward, people gathered around coffee and folding tables. Denise spoke briefly with Angela. I'm sorry they didn't listen the first time, Denise said. Angela shook her head. You made them listen the second. No. Denise glanced toward Laura Bennett across the room. You kept the records. Laura opened the file. People finally did their jobs. Angela smiled. I'll take that. Across the hallway, Denise noticed a familiar face. Eric Collins. He had transferred to another unit months earlier. The reprimand remained in his file. So did the lesson. He stood near the doorway speaking with another soldier, 25, while a 61-year-old civilian maintenance worker pushed a cart of supplies past them. The younger soldier made a dismissive comment about the worker's worn clothes. Denise could not hear every word. She did not need to. Collins's expression changed. Months earlier, he would have looked down, maybe laughed nervously, maybe said nothing. This time he turned toward the soldier. No. The soldier frowned. What? We don't do that here. No speech, no audience, no commander standing nearby. Just one sentence. The maintenance worker continued down the hall without ever knowing what had happened behind him. Denise watched Collins. He noticed her. Their eyes met. Denise gave him one small nod. Nothing more. Collins seemed to understand. That afternoon, Denise drove back to East Fayetteville. By 4:30, winter light had begun fading from the streets. A city bus groaned away from the curb outside Open Table House. Through the windows, warm yellow light spilled onto the sidewalk. Denise entered through the kitchen door. Helen was stirring a pot. Arthur Lewis sat at his usual table. "You're late," Helen said. "I had somewhere to be." Arthur looked up. "Fancy army business?" "Something like that." Denise removed her coat, tied on an apron, and began filling bowls. Arthur watched her. "I heard they put your name on something." News traveled. Denise carried him a bowl of hot soup. "Just a room." "Just a room? Brick walls, tables, chairs." Arthur smiled. "You're impossible." "So I've been told." He looked toward her keys resting beside the counter. The brass whistle lay among them. "What's that old thing?" Denise glanced at it. "Something I kept too long to throw away." Arthur lifted his spoon. "Must be important." Denise looked around Open Table House, at Helen, at the steaming pots, at tired adults coming in from evening shifts, at people who might never wear a uniform, command a unit, receive a medal, or have a room named after them. Then she looked back at Arthur. "It reminds me of something important." "What?" Denise smiled. "That people matter before you know their story." Arthur considered that, then nodded toward his soup. "This matters too." Denise laughed. "Eat before it gets cold." Outside, another bus sighed to a stop. Inside, bowls clinked against tables. Steam rose beneath the yellow lights. Denise picked up her keys. The old whistle turned once against her palm. Raven 17, DC, then the reverse side caught the light. RH. Two small letters that had once proved she had trained the commander. But that was never what made Denise Carter worthy of respect. Not the uniform, not Raven, not Robert Hayes, not the room carrying her name. Her worth had been there when she drove Arthur to the clinic and refused his gas money. It had been there when she brought food to strangers. It had been there when she stood alone before a silent crowd and refused to surrender her dignity just because someone else refused to recognize it. The whistle disappeared into her apron pocket. Denise lifted another bowl of soup, and somewhere across Fort Braddock, beneath a plaque bearing her name, another group of soldiers was learning a lesson that had taken one commander 20 years to understand. The hardest part is not recognizing injustice after the truth comes out. It is becoming the first person willing to speak before it does. If you had been standing in that crowd, which would have been harder for you, recognizing what was wrong, or being the first person to say so? Denise Carter never asked for the Carter Leadership Room, but when she saw Eric Collins finally speak up for a civilian worker with no commander watching, she knew the lesson had traveled farther than her name on a plaque. This story reminds us that silence is not always neutral. Sometimes it quietly gives bad behavior permission to continue. Real accountability begins when ordinary people decide that keeping the peace is no longer more important than protecting someone's dignity. Today, if you hear someone being belittled at work, in a store, or even around a family table, try one small sentence. That's not okay. You don't need Denise Carter's history or authority behind you. You only need to decide that the person standing alone should not have to stand alone anymore. If you had witnessed what happened to Denise at that barbecue, would you have spoken up before Colonel Hayes arrived? Tell me what you think in the comments, because the next story begins with another moment when everyone in the room thinks they know exactly who has the power, and they're about to find out how wrong they are.